The smell hit them first. That sweet, sick rot that crawls into your lungs and refuses to leave. When officers broke down the door of apartment 213 on July 22, 1991, they found hell carved out of a Milwaukee duplex. Body parts in the refrigerator, a human head in the freezer, photographs of dismembered victims arranged like a grotesque gallery, and sitting calmly in handcuffs, a man who would apologize for the inconvenience. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't look like a monster. That was always the problem. He looked like the guy who might help you carry groceries up the stairs. Blonde hair, wire-rimmed glasses, that Midwestern politeness that opens doors and says please and thank you. Born in 1960 to Joyce and Lionel Dahmer, he grew up in Bath Township, Ohio, the kind of suburban nowhere where the biggest scandal should have been someone not mowing their lawn. But even as a child, Jeffrey collected things that shouldn't be collected. Dead animals, roadkill. He'd strip them down to bone with chemicals stolen from his father's laboratory. Lionel was a chemist, and he taught his son about acids and preservation techniques, never imagining what his lessons would eventually preserve. The Dahmer house was falling apart from the inside. Joyce battled mental illness and prescription drug dependency. Lionel buried himself in work. Their marriage dissolved in screaming matches and silences that lasted for days. Jeffrey learned early that people leave, that love is conditional, that the only way to keep someone forever is to make sure they can never go. At 17, still in high school, he committed his first murder. Stephen Hicks was 19, hitchhiking home from a rock concert when Dahmer picked him up on June 18, 1978. "Come back to my place," Dahmer said. "We'll drink some beer, listen to music. It'll be fun." When Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer struck him with a barbell, again and again until the leaving stopped, until Stephen Hicks became Jeffrey's first kept thing. He dismembered the body in his family's basement while his parents were getting divorced upstairs. He scattered the remains in the woods behind the house, but it didn't feel finished. Months later, he went back, collected the bones, and pulverized them with a sledgehammer. Even then, at 17, he understood that evidence was just another word for memory. For 9 years, Jeffrey Dahmer was almost normal. He joined the army, got kicked out for drinking. He worked at a chocolate factory, the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Company, where the smell of cocoa would mask other smells later. He lived with his grandmother, Catherine, who worried about the strange sounds coming from the basement and the awful odors that industrial-strength air fresheners couldn't quite cover. But the hunger was growing. In 1987, he killed again. Stephen Tuomi, 24, met Dahmer at a gay bar. They went to a hotel room. Dahmer claimed he woke up to find Tuomi dead, said he didn't remember killing him, said it must have been the alcohol. As if murder could be an accident of chemistry. He bought a large suitcase and wheeled Stephen Tuomi through the hotel lobby like luggage. The killing became a routine. Dahmer would cruise the bars, the bus stations, the places where young men gathered who wouldn't be missed quickly enough. He'd offer money for photographs, for sex, for just hanging out and having a few drinks. His apartment became a laboratory of desire and death. The process was always the same. First, he'd drug them, sleeping pills dissolved in drinks, enough to make them compliant but not enough to kill. Not yet. He wanted them unconscious but alive for what came next, the drilling. And here's the thing. Dahmer believed he could create the perfect companion, someone who would never leave, never reject him, never prefer someone else's company. He drilled holes into their skulls while they were still alive and poured in acid or boiling water, trying to create a living zombie, a person-shaped thing that would exist only for him. It never worked. They always died, and when they died, he'd photograph them, pose them, keep parts of them, eat parts of them, because if he couldn't make them stay alive, he could at least make them part of himself forever. By 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer had killed 17 people. His refrigerator looked like a butcher shop. His apartment reeked of death masked by industrial bleach. Neighbors complained about the smell, about strange sounds, about something being very, very wrong in 213. But Jeffrey Dahmer was polite. He apologized for any inconvenience. He explained about his tropical fish dying, about garbage disposal problems, about anything that might make sense to people who couldn't imagine the truth. The end came because of a pair of handcuffs and a young man named Tracy Edwards. On July 22nd, Edwards escaped from Dahmer's apartment with one handcuff still dangling from his wrist. He flagged down a police car, hysterical, trying to explain that the man in 213 had tried to kill him, was going to kill him, had killed others. The officers almost didn't believe him. Edwards was black, visibly upset, talking about things that sounded impossible. But the handcuff was real. The terror was real. And when they reluctantly followed him back to the Oxford apartments, the smell hit them before they reached the door. Dahmer answered calmly. Yes, he'd put the handcuffs on Edwards. They'd been drinking, things got out of hand, it was just rough play between consenting adults. He seemed so reasonable, so apologetic. But then Officer Rolf Mueller noticed the photographs scattered on the coffee table. Polaroids of dismembered bodies, of severed heads, of things that used to be people arranged like still-life paintings. These are for real, Mueller said. Dahmer didn't run, didn't fight, didn't deny. He just said, for what I did, I should be dead. The inventory of apartment 213 read like something from a fever dream. 7 skulls, 4 complete skeletons, photographs of victims in various stages of death and dismemberment, a human heart in the freezer, hands and genitals preserved in formaldehyde, a lobotomy kit, acid, knives, tools for taking people apart and putting them back together in new configurations. 11 of his 17 victims were black men, many of them young, many of them struggling with poverty or addiction or the kind of marginalization that makes disappearing easier. The police had failed them repeatedly, returning 14-year-old Konarak Sintha Sumphone to Dahmer's custody when neighbors called about a naked, bleeding boy trying to escape. The boy had been drugged, tortured, already had acid poured into his brain. The officers saw a domestic dispute between consenting adults and walked away. Konarak died that night. The trial was a formality wrapped in a spectacle. Dahmer pled guilty but insane, claiming he was driven by forces beyond his control. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and decided that evil and insanity were not the same thing. 15 consecutive life sentences, no possibility of parole. He lasted less than 3 years in prison. On November 28, 1994, a fellow inmate beat Jeffrey Dahmer to death with a metal bar while they were cleaning the prison bathroom. Christopher Scarver said God told him to do it, said Dahmer used to make fake limbs out of prison food and leave them around to upset people, said even in death, Jeffrey Dahmer couldn't stop playing with bodies. The families of his victims had waited 3 years for justice and got it delivered by another killer's hands. But here's what stays with you. Long after the crime scene photos fade and the news cameras pack up and leave, Jeffrey Dahmer didn't look like a monster because monsters don't look like anything in particular. They look like neighbors and co-workers and the guy who holds the door for you at the coffee shop. They say please and thank you and apologize for the inconvenience. They look like anyone, like everyone, like the person you pass on the street and never think about again. That's the real horror, not the gore, not the body count, not even the unspeakable things done in apartment 213. It's that Jeffrey Dahmer walked among us for years, polite and unremarkable, while 17 people died for the crime of trusting a stranger who seemed nice enough. The rest of us are left wondering who else is out there, apologizing for the smell.